Tonight we're in Finchley in North London, and welcome to Question Time. And welcome to you either watching or listening at home, to our audience here, and of course to our panel, the Conservative Education Secretary, Nicky, Labour's Shadow Education Secretary, Tristram, the Respect MP, George Galloway, Cristina Odone of the Legatum Institute think tank, and the broadcaster and Guardian columnist, Jonathan Freedland. Thank you very much, and a reminder, as though you needed it, that you have text and Twitter at your disposal tonight if you want to get involved in the debate. Our hashtag BBCQT. You can follow us at BBC Question Time. You can text comments to 83981 and push the red button to see what other people are saying. Our first question, if I can find it, which will take me a moment, from Andrew Myers, please. Andrew Myers.
Is Labour Billy No Mates in the UK business community?
In the business community, is Labour Billy No Mates? Cristina Odone.
Well, I have to say that the Shadow Chancellor, whatever his name is making enemies out of business, which seems to me so perverse, given that what business can do for Britain is to raise us all, our lifestyle, our quality of life. And he is... You know, when he was turning boots into an enemy and making a kind of, ad hominem attack, I just thought, can you not remember, can you not recognize that what is happening is that more and more people are being employed through business, and that, in fact, over the past few years, we've seen the lowest 20% there. We've seen employment figures rising, so that 9 years ago we had only 3% of the lowest 20% being employed, and this year we've seen 32% of the poorest being employed. So if that's not good business practice, what is?
Okay. Jonathan Freedland.
Well, first of all, it's not true that there's no mates. There are some business allies for Labour who like the fact that with Labour they're not going to get a referendum on the European Union in 2017.
He couldn't name any, though, could he?
He couldn't, and that was a pretty bad moment. I mean, given that Ed Miliband also had trouble remembering to mention the deficit in his speech, it is slightly worrying to have the prospect of two amnesiacs at the top of the government. So that is a worry, I admit that. But this idea of no mates, it's not true. There are plenty of businesses who think it will be very destabilising for Britain and for the British economy to go into an unnecessary referendum on the European Union in 2017. But it also depends what you mean by business, this idea that Labour's anti-business. You obviously don't want Labour opposing businesses that create wealth and create jobs, the Boots and John Lewis. That wasn't good. But the idea of the businesses that, for example, don't pay any tax, the Amazons and Starbucks and Googles and Apple, I think you can be anti that kind of business. The businesses that don't pay people a living wage, I think you've got to be against those kinds of businesses. The businesses that are paying people on 0 hours contracts, I think you've got to take a stance against those kind of businesses. I think if Labour is against that kind of business, I've got no problem with that. Often, actually, Labour isn't sufficiently against those kind of businesses. And if they've got no mates in that world, that's fine with me.
Nicky Morgan.
Well, I think what it shows is that there's a clear choice come the general election between, as Cristina says, a party, a leader who understands that businesses create jobs, 1,000 jobs a day, or attacking people who do create those jobs. And I hear what Jonathan says, but, Boots has 70,000 people working for it in the UK, and that 70,000 people are taking home a pay packet, working for a company, and it's a high street business. And why shouldn't somebody who leads a big business like that actually express their views? And I think what was most extraordinary about this was, yes, of course, it's fine for a leader to push back on criticism or to say, look, I'm sorry, I think you've got it wrong and you don't understand our policies. But then to go and attack the person
I agree.
is not right.
The boots thing was bad, but the problem is that the Conservatives have criticised Labour when, for example, Labour got in a fight with the energy big six when they wanted to put a freeze on energy bills. The Tories said that was anti-business. That wasn't. That was anti the kind of monopoly cartel that is emerging with people's energy bills getting too high. And so you'd have more credibility.
But it was so short-sighted. I mean, what happened by having in advance placed a cap on energy pricing was that, you know, first of all, oil prices have plummeted, so our energy bills have plummeted. So it's pretty.
They haven't plummeted. They certainly haven't plummeted, Cristina.
Our energy
but the policy is now completely redundant. The policy is redundant.
The policy is redundant. But also, what was an extraordinary thing was he was. You know, when we were talking about the energy giants and, you know, feeding off of us and the cartel, this was from the Charter Chancellor who had gotten rid of the Monopolies Commission. That was actually the one, you know, the one thing that scrutinised monopolies.
Can I just on this point, you know, actually, but the business, Boots, in the last tax year, paid over £500 million in various taxes, national insurance rates. Those are taxes that go towards paying for our hospitals and, in my case, schools, which mean I've got money to spend on schools. And so that's why I think attacking businesses like Boots is just really bad for the country.
All right. Tristram Hunt, do you think your leader was right to attack Boots, the controller, for saying that they don't want to be lectured by someone who's avoiding his taxes, if indeed he is avoiding his taxes?
Well, we certainly didn't attack Boots. There are 5 million businesses in the UK working hard, employing people, making money, delivering returns to their shareholders, making a profit, making wealth that funds, as Nicky says, public services. And the Labour Party is on the side of wealth creation. The Labour Party is on the side of making money. That is what makes our economy tick. That is what funds our public services. But we have a productivity challenge in this country. We're not making enough money in this country, and part of that is a result of education and skills. Part of that is our rather outdated approach to infrastructure, and on all of these areas, the Labour Party is on the side of business. So when we think about productivity and employment, we want world-class apprenticeship schemes. When we think about finance, the liquid of business, we want to reform our banking system, our British Investment Bank, and crucially, as Jonathan said, you know, we want to make sure we've still got access to our biggest market, which is the European market. And we've got a Prime Minister at the moment who wants to take us out of Europe. We've got a Tory party which is going to deliver indecision for our business. And when you speak to leading business figures, what scares them more than ever is the notion of a Tory government taking us out of Europe and undermining prosperity in the UK. And on all those elements, Labour is on the side of business and wealth creation. We make no apology for it.
Why, in that case, did the Shadow Business Secretary, Chukwumuna, say it's ultimately not in the interests of shareholders? People read this as a kind of ominous threat to end up in the party political arena. That's not where most company chief executives want to be. In other words, slapping him down for daring to criticise Labour's policy.
No, I think business people...
What was he doing then? What was he saying?
Let me explain. Business people should be part of a broad conversation about the general election. They employ lots of people. They create wealth. They're part of our civil society. But I have a rather old-fashioned approach to this, which goes back to the American Revolution, which is that no representation without taxation and no taxation without representation. So if you don't have a vote in the upcoming election, and actually, you know, you're based in Monaco for tax reasons, you shouldn't be lecturing the British people about how they should vote, and nor should you be lecturing British businesses about what British business needs when you yourself are not based in Britain, you're based in Monaco. And call me old-fashioned, but that's my view.
George Galloway.
Well, the clue's in the name. It is the Labour Party, after all. It's supposed to be the party that stands up for working people, which does employ a lot of people on very, very low wages, and it's run by a man who absented himself to Monaco precisely to avoid paying tax for the public services that Nicky was just extolling there. The energy bills have not plummeted. There are people sitting in this hall with their gloves on because they can't afford...
That's because the heating's gone off.
This is the coldest question time I've been on in more than 30 years because the centre can't afford to turn the heating up. So, no, that is the reason. I promise you, I spoke to the people.
No, it's because the heating is broken, George.
That's the diplomatic. That's the diplomatic answer, perhaps. But it's the point that businesses like that need a Labour Party to stand up against them, stand up for the hard-working people who have no choice but to live and pay tax here, can't go to Monaco, can't afford to go to Monaco. And if you live in a glass house, you shouldn't be throwing stones. We shouldn't be lectured by a tax exile in Monaco about how we should vote in the general election here in Britain. That seems to me ABC. And any Labour leader who didn't have the guts to rebut that attack from the beaches of Monaco wouldn't be worthy of his salt.
All right. If you're re-elected the general election, would you be joining Ed Miliband?
I'll certainly be supporting a Labour government, as I've done all of my life since I was a child, of course.
When you turn up?
No, I turn up when I need to turn up.
You sir at the very back. I'll come to you. At the very back.
Just a comment that you made about your creating 1,000 jobs a day. 1,000 jobs a day on zero-hour contracts means nothing. People cannot pay their bills. They cannot feed their kids. It's absolute false economy.
OK, let Nicky Morgan answer your point.
No, I'm sorry. There have been 1,000 jobs in a mixed economy in lots of different ways. People employed, some people self-employed, which is what they might choose to do is right for them. A whole range of ranges. Zero-hours contracts is a problem that was not tackled by the last government. This government has brought in rules and legislation and is looking at zero-hours contracts. And
which mean nothing when people do not understand the rules and regulations. We have people who are in these industries, and especially in my industry, in the hospitality industry, who are undereducated about the contracts, and they have to accept it because they have to eat and they have to heat their homes. But they've got no choice. It's slavery.
No,
I think this is... The point you're making and the response you just heard from Nicky Morgan, it shows you why, in a way, this Conservative attack on Labour is in some ways very out of date. There used to be a view that if you were anti-business, that immediately ended the argument. It was a disaster for you to be against business. In 2015, when people know about zero-hours contracts, they know about people on poverty wages that the rest of us have to top up through the benefits system, people hired below or on the minimum wage or even just below it. It no longer carries the same weight to be told that being against business means you're out of the game politically. On the contrary, people want to stand up against those kinds of business.
But also the point about, you know, the kind of jobs that are being created. If they are not well-paid jobs that can, you know, put food on the family table, that have a career structure with them, that have training behind them, we're seeing far too many jobs in a very, very fragile economy. And this is about productivity. This is why our country is not growing wealthier, because we're not delivering the kind of jobs that grows an economy over the long term. And that's about investing in training,
hold on.
and skills.
Let's hear more from our audience. You, sir.
Of course, everything was absolutely wonderful under 13 years of Labour government, wasn't it? But I'd like to ask Mr Hunt the question, if you're so interested in tax matters, why was it that for 13 years the New Labour, or whatever they want to call themselves, held the top rate of tax at 40%. A few weeks before the election, they whacked it up to 50%, knowing that an incoming Conservative government would have to put it down again, which they did to 45%. And I've heard many times on this programme Labour representatives, such as yourself and others, saying, oh, the Tories have given tax cuts to their mates. I'm sorry, it's pure hypocrisy. Anyone who trusts your lot with the economy wants their brains tested.
Well, let me answer that. Let me answer that. The Labour Party makes no apology for having a competitive and fair tax system. We want people to make money and invest in this country and do what they will with their money.
I'm sorry, that's pure hypocrisy, sir. That's pure hypocrisy. Time and time again, Labour representatives on this panel have criticised the Conservatives for giving tax cuts to their mates, for bringing down 50% rate to 45% when you kept it at 30%
you've made the point
for 13
now.
years.
You answer the point, and then we're going to somebody else.
OK, I will. You know that we had a major financial crash in 07-08 which decimated our public finances. And as a result of that, we had to raise the top rate of tax. So those with the broadest shoulders, those who are the wealthiest, could help to pay down the public finance deficit. So absolutely right. We make no apology for asking the wealthiest, those who did well in the good years, to make sure they have a contribution.
The question is very simple. Why did you wait till 2 months before the general election to do it?
We didn't wait till just before 2 months of the general election. These things take time once you've introduced the budget measures. The issue is this. Do you want to invest in your public services, your schools and hospitals in the future? Nicky's announced a 10% cut to the school's budget this week. Or do you want more tax cuts for multi-millionaires?
You still not answered the question.
That's the issue.
It's pure hypocrisy. Every word that came out of you was pure hypocrisy.
Sir. Leave... The gentleman, the man at the very back there, in the three in from the back, in the back row.
If the economy has really grown, why do we see more homelessness and shelter homes throughout the whole country?
OK, right. And you, yes.
Again, having asked the question, you haven't actually answered the question at all. The reality is, you talk about being on side of business. The reality is in creating wealth. The reality is your first policy would be a mansion tax, and that would hit wealth creators. It would hit, and in London especially, a number of people it would hit and attack. You don't understand the difference between big business and small business. You don't understand the number of people who all they want to do, they wake up in the morning, they worry about their businesses, they go to bed at night worrying about their businesses. All they want to do is they want to pay their wages, they want to pay their staff wages, they worry about their suppliers, and you, unfortunately, as a party, have completely missed the point.
But
you make business a dirty word.
My wife runs a small business, so I know about the challenges facing small business people in our family. So don't give me a lecture on that. But we make no apology.
Wait a moment, will you
invest in the NHS?
Look, will you wait a moment? Stop going on a riff each time somebody says something. I just want to ask him. You asked this question.
Personal.
No, I know. No, all right. Now I'll give you a chance. Right. But you asked the question originally.
Indeed.
But you then explained why you think Labour's wrong. But you say that do you believe that they have no friends in business? That was your question. No mates. Can you defend that?
I believe they've made business a dirty word. I believe that when they talk about business, they resort immediately to talking about the Bootses and the energy companies. The reality is there are 5 million business owners in this country, and they are not tax avoiders. They pay their wages, they pay their taxes, and they are the ones you should be supporting. And whether you believe it or not, or whether you choose to believe it or not, the attitude and the response from Ed Miliband this week was a typical response to anything when it comes to business. You go tax avoidance, you go big business, and you fail to support the business owner.
Well, I couldn't be clearer on this. I believe in people making money. I believe in businesses succeeding. As I've said, my family, we have a small business, you know. These things are important to us. It funds the schools and the hospitals. But we also think that those in high-value properties where we see great concentrations of wealth should also help to support our National Health Service, which needs investment in it, so that right across the country people can get access to healthcare free. And that is a Labour Party socialist idea, and we make no apology for it.
Do you know what it costs?
Say again?
I'm not quite sure you're aware of what it costs to buy a house in London. That wasn't, however, the point I was going to make. We've been talking about Monte Carlo, we've been talking about the utility companies. As my friend over here said, we've just been through 13 years where you had the opportunity to sort out the utility companies when oil prices were very high, and we've been through 13 years when you were able to sort out the situation of Apple and Amazon and this one and that one, who apparently are not playing by the rules. Now, all of a sudden, that it's not in your hands, you're throwing it back in the face of whose hands it's in.
George Galloway, do you agree with that
hypocrisy?
analysis?
Yes, and the fact that Tristram will not apologise is part of the problem, because we had for 13 years Tony Blair and Gordon Brown kissing the backsides of business. They boasted in Goldman Sachs that every partner present was paying less tax under them than they were under Margaret Thatcher. The Financial Times reported it, a Christmas soiree. They threw hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds to bail out the banks. That was pretty pro-business. They didn't take a single seat on any of the boards of the banks that they bailed out. So it was private failure subsidised by public money. So he actually ought to apologise that he didn't, and his party, New Labour, didn't take action to force these tax dodgers to pay their dues to the taxman over the years that they had the biggest Labour majorities in history. So I think an apology is due.
All right, Cristina.
Isn't what we want from both Conservatives and Labourites for us all to join in a cleaning up of capitalism? Because we all believe that whether it's the small shopkeeper or it's the big company, they are the ones who will really regenerate our economy. But what we want them to do is to clean up their act. And that is why our think tank is proposing a revitalising of capitalism.
Okay, but when Ed Miliband did that, he distinguished between producers...
What we want is for money laundering of Russian oligarchs' money or sheikhs from Saudi Arabia to stop. What we want is for banks to stop pocketing the profits and passing on their losses to us, the taxpayers. What we want is for Starbucks to stop pretending that for 16 years they didn't have a profit. And once we can get that, we can restore capitalism as not a market system, but a market system and a moral system.
All right, thank you.
And I think that that is what we want.
Thank you. Very brief, John.
Very briefly. Ed Miliband tried to make this distinction between predators and producers.
In that speech, let him speak.
You remember that party conference speech? He said there were predators, the companies we're talking about who don't pay tax and are exploiting workers, and then there were producers, those businesses who are putting bread on the table and hiring people. And when he made that speech, was exactly the kind of argument you've made. People on the right mocked him as if he was some kind of Stalinist, posing some huge Marxist threat. Red Ed is back. So now when you're saying we need to clean up capitalism, that actually was a critique Labour had. My criticism of Labour is they haven't maintained or sustained that argument nearly enough.
All right, we're going to go on, because we're 20 minutes in. If you want to join Question Time, which I'm sure you'd be tempted to do, having heard all this, our next two programmes is, first one's in Norwich, and the second one in Stockton-on-Tees, a fortnight from now. So if you want to come to Norwich next week on the Thursday evening, or Stockton-on-Tees, the address is there on the screen, and just contact us and you'll be extremely welcome. I want to take a question from Richard Smith now, please.
Is it realistic for David Cameron to expect there to be no more bog-standard schools whilst reducing funding education?
Right, the heart of the argument over education. David Cameron says there'll be no more bog-standard schools, but he's this week announced reductions in the funding in education. You better start on this, Nicky Morgan.
I thought it might come to me first. Firstly, on the funding, we have promised in the next Parliament a good deal for schools. By the end of the next Parliament, our schools will be getting £3.5 billion more than they are getting now. And yes, it is absolutely right for David Cameron and the whole of the Conservative Party to set high standards and to know that schools and heads and teachers who work extremely hard in this country can meet those standards. And that's exactly what we have done. The whole of the policies of this Parliament, our whole plan for education has been about making sure that every student has a good local school to go to.
So what's
education
this cut
is
of
critical.
What is this cut of 7%, according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, 10% according to others, that's going to happen when you apply a flat rate, flat cash, I think the Prime Minister called it, to every pupil? How are you not going to be poorer off as a school?
Well, because as pupil numbers go up, the amount per pupil is staying the same, but as pupil numbers go up, schools overall, their budgets will increase. And that's the reason why, basically. Schools will have more money to spend. But the other point I should just say is we've been through difficult economic circumstances in this Parliament. And even that, despite that, I mean, obviously we could spend unlimited amounts on schools if we had that money, but we don't. But what we've also seen in this Parliament is that schools, again, have worked extremely hard and standards have risen. We have 1 million more pupils in good or outstanding schools than we had in 2010. A good education transforms lives. It is the building block of the future of our country. And that's why the Conservatives have put it at the heart of our election campaign.
Right. The man in spectacles there at the back.
Extremely fine words from the Education Secretary, but the cold hard reality is that the Conservatives have cut the funding not just to schools but also to our libraries, and have actually, instead of increase social mobility, they're doing their level best, from my point of view, to actually reduce social mobility across the country. Now, what are you going to do regarding getting money back into our schools, more money to our schools, more money to our libraries? Libraries are closing all over the country. And what answer can you give to us to that when you're cutting funding to councils and councils are having less freedom to raise their council tax?
Well, look, we've already talked about the fact that we have been through a huge recession in this country. Our economy shrank by the most it has in 100 years, and therefore we have had to make difficult decisions at national government level, and therefore that has impacted on local government spending. But actually we are seeing the gap between disadvantaged pupils and advantaged pupils, that is getting less. And we have put in the pupil premium, that's £7 billion we have put into schools, and schools are spending wisely. You know, I go to visit schools, meet teachers up and down the country every week, and I talk to them about how they're spending that pupil premium money, and it is making a huge difference. Now, how local government, how local authorities choose to set their budgets and the services they feel that they need to make changes to is very much a matter for them. And I know that in some parts of the country there are different ways of doing that, and there are libraries that are going to be run by others, including volunteers. But at the end of the day, just standing back, we have to, as a country, live within our means. We cannot carry on as we were doing under the last government eventually, which was continually spending more than we're getting in. That is not fair for the next generation who are going to be saddled with that debt if we do not deal with it now.
But of all the areas to cut...
Hang on, Tristram Hunt. I'll come to you, Brenton. Tristram Hunt.
So what the Prime Minister announced this week was a real terms cut to the education budget of 10% if there's another Tory government. So their priority is to deliver tax cuts for multimillionaires. Their priority is to... return public spending back to the levels of the 1930s as a proportion of GDP, to build up this surplus, all at the expense of our schools and our public services. And those aren't Labour values. And there's a big difference then at the upcoming general election. But it's not just about the money, it's what you do with the money. And one of the big differences...
Can we just stick with the money for a moment? You've attacked them for cutting. How much are you going to spend? You're going to keep the same, inflation-proof?
We will be announcing that in the next couple of weeks.
So you don't know?
No, you do not know.
We will do better.
You don't know what you're going to do.
Hold on. As the Labour Party always does, it will do better than the Conservative parties on education. Right through the history of the post-war years, it is Labour governments that deliver. But
why can't you say, you've heard the Tory, you're going to give them 2 weeks for this argument just to wait while you decide what you're going to do? You haven't decided, you mean? You don't know what you're going to do.
We will be setting out our plans on our timetable so that everyone at the general election knows which way to vote. You know, we've got another 93 days to go on this. You will know precisely our spending plans on schools versus the Conservatives. And I'll tell you this right now, we will do better than them. But more than just the money, a big difference between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party is our belief in having qualified teachers in the classroom. And I think viewers and parents will be shocked to know that under this government, 400,000 kids are being taught by unqualified teachers. Those who don't have the capacity sometimes to help the stages of learning.
Somebody said you were an unqualified teacher.
Sorry? Mr. Tristram Hunt, you were taught by unqualified teachers at private schools. Several private schools across the entire country employ teachers who don't have said document and are able to teach. I know a man here in the audience who has over 40 years of experience in his said field but cannot teach because of this said document. I don't understand the reason why you're advocating QTS when it doesn't really make a difference to one's ability to teach or not.
Well, It's not right. No education system can exceed the quality of its teaching in the classroom. And I was at a great school in Croydon yesterday morning, a turnaround school, and I said, "You've got any unqualified teachers here?" Head teacher said, "No. We're trying to do the best for our children. I know you've got to have great qualified teachers because it's more than just the subject knowledge. We all know people with great subject knowledge, but you've got to help people understand the stages of learning. And there are also issues here, actually, about protection and safeguarding and having qualified teachers in the classroom to deliver the outcomes we need." And go back to my friend right at the back, talking about jobs and unemployment. If we want to build the economy that we need, high productive economy, it begins in our schools, it begins with education and training, and it begins with having really great qualified, motivated teachers there doing the job, inspiring.
Learning begins with communication, fella.
Can't you
it
rely
begins
on,
with communication, it's not about stages
You'll come
of.
in a moment. Can't you rely on head teachers to judge whether somebody is the right person to teach in their school?
Yes.
Well, not always,
Yes.
because we have examples now. We have examples in Staffordshire of teaching assistants doing the jobs of teachers. And the role of a teaching assistant is different to the role of a teacher. And they're facing budget pressures, and we need qualified teachers in the classroom.
Some of the most inspiring teachers I've ever encountered were not out of teacher training colleges. And you know what? They taught values. Yeah. They taught not British values, they taught real values.
Well, these were nuns. These were all nuns, weren't they?
I think that is really...
This is your... I mean, I know about your religious schooling, and there's a difference, I think, between a state education system, having a state education system, having qualified teachers in the classroom.
Better than you, Tristram.
Were they?
I went to a Catholic school when I was little, and then I went to a state school. And then I went to a private school. So I've done them all, Tristram. And I can tell you that the best ones did not come out of teacher training college. And I wonder what your Ofsted inspectors would say about my teachers. Because do you know what? They were absolutely dedicated to us, and they didn't care about political correctness.
That's quite right.
And they didn't say to us, they didn't ask questions of us when we were 5 years old about, can you read your can we do sexual education? Can we do sexual values?
Right.
Come on, Tristram.
No,
it was one of the most ridiculous. It was one of the most ridiculous positions I've ever heard a shadow education secretary take.
The woman here in front.
Every year there's a problem with registering and getting people into the schools they want to. Sometimes it causes problems within the families because one person might have more than one child and they've got to go across the country to get a second child to a different school because they can't get in. And there's a percentage of children that can't actually get into school, and they're falling by the wayside in reference to getting proper education because no one's picked it up.
Well, this is the kind of problem that has been partly created by an area that is unfashionable to talk about because it sounds so dull. But one of the things with reforms was getting rid of or moving away from the local education authority. That the whole cult of the academy school and the free school meant either shrinking or, in some cases, just doing away with the local education authority altogether. I think that was a huge mistake. Those bodies, flawed often though they were, did an important role of coordinating exactly the kind of situation you
Jonathan, they still have the duty, local authorities have a duty to provide a sufficiency of places. They do it through state-maintained schools, or they will do it through academies.
You know that their authority has been shrunk by the...
And they will do it through free schools as well. And one of the things we're doing, absolutely, is we spent £5 billion in this Parliament on making sure there are enough school places. Now, London in particular, the population growth is enormous, and therefore we are working with local authorities, working with schools to see how they can expand. But that has been one of the things we've seen in these free schools, which is where schools, parents, organisations can identify the need for more places in an area, or alternatively, see, the trouble with Jonathan's model is there may have been places available, but they weren't places that parents and families were happy with. And therefore what the free schools have allowed to happen is good places, good schools to be set up. And there are some truly inspirational schools that have been set up.
There's some very scary schools in the free school
40,000 pupils are in free schools at the moment. And one of the things that Tristram needs to confirm very, very soon is what's going to happen to the future of those schools. That's 40,000 pupils who don't know what would happen if Tristram ever were to become shadow education secretary. Well, precisely.
All existing free schools and those in the pipeline remain under a Labour government.
Fine, thank you. George Galloway.
Well, we could do with some bog standard schools in Bradford. 60% of our children go to schools which are neither good nor outstanding. And we have the second worst outcome of all the schools in England. So give me some bog standard. That would be a step up for us. Now, I didn't spend as much time in education as the other people on this panel, and I'm sandwiched between two, it would appear, private school graduates. And it's not my best subject, but I do know, Nicky, that you can't get better schools by cutting the spending on the schools by 10%. That much I know. The thing that Tristram has to deal with is not the differences between Labour and Tory education policy, but the similarities. And he's just confirmed one there. You don't have to wait 2 weeks. They're going to keep the free school and academy nonsense. That are open. That are open. And how did we get here? Because the new Labour government introduced these wheezes of academies when all the evidence is that handing over large amounts of public money, public property and land to carpet manufacturers or car dealers who call themselves academy gurus has failed. I say let local authorities run the schools and let head teachers govern them.
OK. The man on the gangway there with spectacles, you, sir. With spectacles on the gangway. Yes, you.
Yeah. It's good that the Secretary has actually announced that this funding is going to be protected for schools. And that's from the 5 to 16-year-olds. But my issue is where I work is in an FE college. Year on year, funding has been reduced. And what we get from the schools, we don't have adequate resources to bring them up to scale. What is the two, Nicky and the Shadow Secretary,
What's his name?
Going to actually do about the actual FE colleges that are actually not getting enough funding?
Very briefly, FE, further education. You kick off on that when you have.
Well, look, it has been. It's a decision we've made in this Parliament. The funding has been particularly protected for the younger age groups because getting it right at the start, at primary, is absolutely critical for young people in terms of setting them up for life. We have continued to fund post-16. We're about to make announcements shortly for the next financial year. Yes, there have been difficult decisions to be taken, but we are funding colleges and sixth forms in order to allow students to take the A-levels they want to do. And now the funding is per student, not per qualification, which is the right thing to do. I
said I'd give you a quick answer on that too.
Yeah, the Labour Party is very, very passionate about further education. I was at City College in Southampton today, a really brilliant FE focusing on maritime...
You were in Croydon today?
No, yesterday.
Oh, yesterday.
Croydon yesterday. I was in Southampton this morning. Wonderful candidate, Rowena Davis.
Wandering round.
No. I didn't meet Gary. We want to create institutes of technical education at our FE colleges, which is basically where we connect high-level technical vocational skills with local businesses and sectors to make sure that we're getting the apprentices, the engineers, the wealth creators of the future to build the businesses and technologies that we need. This is a really signal part of Labour's education vision.
Okay. I want to take a couple more points. The woman there, you, yes, and then you with the spectacles.
Just to get back to the point, while you continue, governments of either colour continue to pit schools against each other in performance tables and league tables, you are going to end up with bog standard schools because people move to get their children into a school that's up the table, or also faith schools include that. And what's left is that people who can't get into those or don't know how to move and get into those areas are left with the dregs. So you are going to end up with...
So you mean whatever you do, you'll always have bog standard schools because people move to the better ones?
So take the whole idea of this school's better than that school. All schools, they should have the same standards, and then you wouldn't need to have people moving to get into the good schools.
I'm just going to make one point about this, the constant change that happens and the sort of fiddling around at the edges with the system, often of measuring rather than of teaching. And just making this point as a parent, I only discovered this recently. My oldest child is going to be taking GCSEs in 2017, and thanks to the reform passed by your predecessor, it means they are changing the marking grading system for one set of subjects, but not for the other. So the teachers were explaining that his results will consist of potentially 2 1s, 3 4s, an A, a B, and then 3 9s and a 4. It's going to be completely baffling. They said this. It will be confusing for the employer, confusing for your children, and certainly confusing for parents because they've phased in yet another change. And I think this emphasis constantly on sort of tweaking, fiddling the system doesn't take enough account of the parents and particularly the children.
All right. Thank you. Let's go on. We have to keep moving. Gabriel Rosen, please.
Why is anti-Semitism rising in the UK?
Why is anti-Semitism?
And do you think a certain member of the panel may bear some responsibility for this?
Jonathan Freedland.
Well, like a lot of people, I was very dispirited by these new figures that came out today that showed that anti-Semitic attacks in Britain had risen to the highest figure ever recorded, 1,100 attacks last year. Some people may think that's not such a big figure, but Britain's Jews are a small community, less than 300,000. And it's dispiriting because we know, and we've seen so recently, that these kinds of attacks, and Paris is the example that's in my mind, can lead to murderous consequences. So there's huge fear about that. I don't think Britain, incidentally, is an anti-Semitic country. I don't. The Jewish community, and I'm proudly a member of that community, we've put down deep roots here, and the community has been allowed to thrive. I don't think the country is in any way anti-Semitic, and that's not what people are frightened of, and there is fear. The fear is instead of that kind of Paris scenario, of this murderous death cult, and that's what they are, of individuals who might try to repeat in London or Manchester, where there are large Jewish communities, what was seen in Paris. So the fear is from those handful of those sort of violent jihadist individuals. Now, as to why there may be an increase, and there are these figures that have recorded an increase, there was an upsurge in the numbers last summer when violence resumed in Gaza. And so violence in the Middle East, and the people who keep these figures know this, every time there's violence in the Middle East, it's followed by an increase in anti-Semitic attacks here. Now, why is that? That's because some of the rhetoric around Israel gets so heated and so inflamed that people who can't hold always that distinction in their mind between what's Israel, a country several thousand miles away, and what are Jews, people here.
Oh, well, wait.
They can't always hold that distinction in their mind, and some of that rhetoric spills over. And since you mentioned the person, member of the panel tonight, George Galloway, I know, is on people's minds, and some of what he has said, I know he's usually very careful to draw a distinction between Jews and Israel, but some of the rhetoric he has used on Israel, some of the ideas he's planted on Israel, for example, suggesting that Israel may have been behind the Ukrainian revolution. And there's, I've got the quotes here if that comes to question. Or suggesting, wait a second, or suggesting that chemical weapons attack in Syria in August 2013, that Al-Qaeda and Israel had teamed up together to stage that operation. If people hear that kind of thing, and believe that Israel is somehow uniquely the source of all evil in the world, even terrible things that happen miles away, they are going to eventually not be able to contain their fury and lash out even at Jewish targets. Unfortunately, the evidence is there. It happens every time there's trouble in the Middle East. So somebody like George Galloway, who definitely has a following and an audience and has wonderful powers of rhetoric, we've heard them tonight, he and people like him need to exercise great responsibility in this area, because it is incendiary, and it's sensitive, and as we've seen from these figures today, it can lead to hate.
Okay. George Galloway.
Well, I see, David, that with characteristic care you have carefully balanced the audience this evening. The question.
Listen.
Well, listen,
I'll bring you in.
You can be the lions.
Let Mr. Galloway
You can be the
speak.
lions. I'll be Daniel. You will not stop me speaking. You will not stop me speaking. You will not stop me speaking, however much you shout, because when the Charlie Hebdo affair erupted, there were millions of people demanding that freedom of speech should be protected. And no one in Britain will accept the right of those shouting at me now to exclude a British Member of Parliament from the BBC in any constituency in Britain. None of you will. Now, I'm very sorry that Jonathan Freedland, in what he has just said, has given credence to the absolutely false allegation implicit in the question. You see, I know about political violence. I was assaulted 3 times in 4 months in London. Well, you say I wonder why. This is, of course, making my point. You see, you're in favour of some political violence, but against other political violence. You're in favour of freedom of speech for some people, but not for other people. Not a single, not one single spokesman for the Jewish community, not a single Jewish community newspaper condemned the assaults upon me, which have led to the imprisonment of 1 man and the fining of 2 others.
George, can you come?
Did you set me up here?
No, you're not.
Am I on trial here? Well, let me
George,
speak.
answer the question.
Let me speak. I'm being bayed at by the audience.
All right, George.
I've been directly accused by another panellist. Let me answer.
What he accused you of, and what I'd like you to address, not about how you've been assaulted.
No, I will.
But the conflation between Israel and Jewishness or Jews, which is what actually.
This is a dangerous conflation. It's a false synonym. Zionism and Israel are different things from Judaism and Jewishness. And anybody who confuses these 2 things, whether they're an anti-Semite or whether they are so-called leaders of the Jewish community, is making a grave mistake. Now, the Community Safety Trust, as Jonathan has just done, blamed the spike on what Jonathan described as a resumption of violence in Gaza last summer. I think what he meant was the mass murder of 2,136 Palestinians locked up in a prison camp called Gaza. 500 of them children. 500 of them children. He called it. All
right, listen. All right, hold on a second.
He called it a resumption of violence. Other people call it mass murder by Israel. No.
All right, now, George.
I have never.
Just wait a minute, George. Look, you've got a number of you are just shouting. There are a number of people who I can see who are actually agreeing with what George is saying. I'd like just, George, if you'd pause a moment. Let's hear from you, because you've been shouting there in the corner there.
Thank you.
Make your remarks, and one of the 2 of you who've been shouting. Because I want this to be, which it should be in question time, a reasoned debate, not a shouting match.
Thank
you. You go first, and then I'll give George a chance to answer what you say, and then we'll have the other members of the panel. You go first.
George, your comments are deliberately provocative. Just last year, you declared Bradford an Israeli free zone. In doing so, what you did is you took a deep-rooted, multifaceted conflict in another area of the world and brought it to the streets of the UK. And in doing that, you directed your comments indirectly to the Jewish community. And as a result of that, you put the British Jewish community on the front line at a very volatile time.
You're in the white shirt.
Me?
Yes, you're in the white shirt.
George Galloway sits here and he says he's got nothing to do with anti-Semitism, but when he goes and he encourages Hezbollah in Lebanon, who dance in the streets when Jews are killed in Israel, and he's videos on YouTube handing over cash. He said, this is the money, handed it over to a Hamas official in Gaza, who encourage and endorse suicide bombings on Israeli streets. Jews care a lot more about encouraging murder of Jews than in making little grandiose statements on this stage about Jews in London.
Hang on, and the woman behind you. Yes.
I think that with everything that George has said and everything that I have heard of him in Bradford and outside of Bradford, he's always made a clear distinction between Zionism and Israel's foreign policy and not being anti-Semite. And I think, just going back to your point, Jonathan, you used, it seems your favourite word in what you were saying was rhetoric, Israel's rhetoric. A lot of what Israel does is not rhetoric. What George said about Gaza was 100% correct, and you have to accept some of it is factual. Sorry, no. Some of it is factual. It's not all rhetoric.
I wasn't talking about Israel's rhetoric. I was talking about George
No, but you
Galloway's
used
rhetoric
that. You said
because
there's
I
a
was
lot of
being asked
rhetoric
about
around
it.
Israel. You categorically said that. There's a lot of rhetoric around Israel. The press has a lot of rhetoric around Israel. You mentioned that in connection with
I think you just said
Israel.
Israeli rhetoric.
All right, let's go on. Let's go on with the discussion. George, we'll come back to you, of course. Cristina Odone.
Driving up here to North Finchley, we passed with the taxi an unbearable sight. It was a synagogue. Police all around it, barbed wire, cameras everywhere. And I thought, and this is a temple where people pray, and it has to be shielded like this and protected like this. I agree. But what I'm saying is, it's not just the George Galloways among us who may or may not have, and I think he has, fueled this hostility. But an atmosphere has now developed in which the Jewish community of 240,000 people, so very small minority, is feeling put upon. And whether it is the attacks on kosher slaughters, whether it is the Ofsted inspectors who go to Orthodox Jewish schools and say, hey, why is it that you say that women should be modestly covered? Why is it that you don't approve of gay weddings? There's something going on in the air, and it is anti-Semitic.
All right. Nicky Morgan, let me go around the rest of the panel, George, then we'll come back to you. Nicky Morgan.
Your question was about the rise in anti-Semitism. I think John used the word dispiriting. I'd use the word deeply depressing. The British Jews make an enormous contribution to our society. And this country has a proud tradition of offering asylum to those most in need. And we have just marked in this country the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz and Holocaust Memorial Day. And it's not just the Jewish community. There are many communities who have come to this country seeking safety and refuge and actually reveling or making the most of the freedoms that we have in this country. Freedom of speech, which is why it's right that George Galloway is invited on a panel like this and able to put his views, and you're able to put your views. But also respect and tolerance of other faiths and beliefs.
So what's your answer to the question that Gabriel asked, which is why is anti-Semitism rising?
Because I think, sadly, there are some people in this country who do want the British Jews to be fearful. And it breaks my heart to think that there are young Jewish boys and girls who are now frightened walking to school, whose parents are frightened about what might be happening when they are at school, who are having to hide the fact that they are Jewish. And that's not just about Jewish, that's about any community. I don't want them to feel frightened on the streets of this country. I say we have a proud tradition, and I think it is deeply depressing what we are seeing. It's right to have a debate of some sorts tonight, but I'm afraid it's absolutely right that you should make your views known about what George Galloway has to say.
George Galloway.
Well, I can't tell you how deeply I and people who support me will resent the course of this part of the programme. Anti-Semitism is a foul and virulent form of racism which led, in the 1930s and 40s, to the Holocaust, the greatest crime in human history. I wasn't born then. I had nothing to do with that. And if I had been born then, I would have been the first in the line at the recruitment office to fight fascism, which was a Christian European phenomenon. Now, everything that's been said with melancholy.
Do you know how many priests and nuns were
just take your hand off me. Take your hands off me. Everything that's been said here with melancholy about the shadow cast by the rise in anti-Semitism could be said manyfold about the Islamophobia and the fear of Muslims in Britain. The number of attacks on Muslims, on Muslim property, is many times more than these fascistic attacks. It is many times more than these fascistic attacks on Jews and Jewish property. Why can't we all oppose anti-Semitism and Islamophobia? Why can't we oppose not just the attacks on kosher, but the attacks on halal?
Of course,
which
I oppose that too.
UKIP, who are not here tonight, just yesterday said they would ban, meaning that the observant Jews and observant Muslims in this country would have to leave the country. Why can't we unite around issues like that?
All right,
my last point, David, one last point. I beg you, don't conflate Zionism, Israel, and Jews in London. It's a very dangerous thing to do. No, it's a... No.
All right, don't shout. Please don't shout out.
No.
Please don't shout.
Many Jews are not Zionists, and most Zionists are not Jews.
All right.
And it's a very dangerous game that you're playing here. Very, very dangerous.
All right. Can we please have silence for a moment? Tristram Hunt hasn't spoken. I want to hear what he has to say. Tristram.
This is not an arms race between Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. In the community I represent in Stoke-on-Trent, we had effectively a terrorist attack on our mosque in Hanley, in the middle of our community. But the figures from the Community Security Trust today are deeply worrying of Jews being attacked for being Jews. And when you read the report about old men being attacked on their way to synagogues, about gravestones being desecrated, about the labels put on Jewish produce in supermarkets. Because when you look at the history of this, it begins with the Jews, but it never ends with the Jews. And it begins with the boycott of Jewish goods, and it often moves to an attack on Jewish lives. And so we have to be very, very careful about disassociating legitimate protest about the actions of Israel, and I hold no candle for the Netanyahu government, and the cancer of anti-Semitism, which we should also be clear is on the rise across Europe. And whether it's the attacks in Belgium, in the museum in Belgium, whether it's the shooting of Jewish children in Toulouse, whether it's the Molotov cocktails thrown at synagogues in Germany, this cancer is growing again in Europe. And for me, this makes the establishment and the protection and the security of the State of Israel incredibly important, that they have this security still available. And
No, not one final point. You say over that, because we're coming towards the end here.
Just to say, my fellow Jews may not be too pleased, but I listened to a programme, I believe, on Press TV. George Galloway may have forgot it, but he actually bawled out someone who telephoned in when he realised that she was being anti-Semitic, accusing Jews of running the world or whatever it is. So I don't regard George Galloway at all as an anti-Semite. I think he is very misguided in many, many other areas. But the point I'd like to make to the programme, to listeners, is that there is, unfortunately, a strong correlation, in answer to the question made, between the rise of the number of Muslims in Europe and the rise in anti-Semitism. We are not told, in the number of acts that are made against Jews, I don't know if they're recorded this way, how many come from Muslims and how many don't. But I suspect that there's a very strong relationship.
All right. Well, I'm afraid we've got hands up all around here. I have to stop because the hour of the programme is up, and we can't go on. Just to say, Question Time is going to be in Norwich next week. We've got Chris Bryant for Labour, the Liberal Democrat Energy Secretary Ed Davey, the UKIP Deputy Chairman Suzanne Evans, and Armando Iannucci, the satirist, on the programme. And the week after that, we're going to be in Stockton-on-Tees. Now, if you'd like to come to either programme, Norwich or Stockton, apply in the usual way. Go to our website, the address is there, or ring 0330 123 9988. If you're listening on 5 Live, this debate carries on, of course, on Question Time Extra Time, as usual. But my thanks to all of you on this panel and to all of you who came here to Finchley tonight to take part in it. From London until next Thursday from Question Time, good night.
More late night politics from this week, live on BBC One next.